And here we are again. The Supreme Court has decided to take another Second Amendment case. This time it's the matter of the country of Mexico trying to sue firearms manufacturers here in the United States. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. That's right, we are staying on the path of the Supreme Court as they have also in the last week taken on a case that has large implications. Of course, I'm talking about the Smith & Wesson versus the United Mexican States lawsuit. To talk us through it today, we have brought back an attorney from Michelle & Associates. He's also the recent recipient of the Scholar of the Year Award from Second Amendment Foundation. That is Costas Moros. Costas, how are you today?
Great, thanks, and thanks for noting the award. Yeah, I was definitely caught off guard, but I'm honored to receive it. Thanks to the Second Amendment Foundation for that. It was a big honor.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and just jump right into this. We talked about the Vanderstock case in the last video with Chuck. Not necessarily switching gears away from Second Amendment litigation, the Supreme Court also decided to take on this case. Can you go ahead and just give us a roundabout view of what this lawsuit actually is?
Okay, so there's two pieces, but we'll start with the basic issue in this lawsuit. So the country of Mexico, Estados, Unidos, Mexicanos, I don't know if I said that right, but the country of Mexico is suing Smith & Wesson's brand, Inc. and other defendants about their firearms practices, their legal firearm selling practices, and alleging that their practices have harmed Mexico by allowing the proliferation of firearms across the border into that country, which then cartels and other criminals use to commit crimes. So, for example, someone buys an AR-15 legally in a gun shop in Arizona and then sells it illegally to a cartel recipient in a sort of straw purchase scenario, and then that person takes it into Mexico and gives it to the cartel. So that's the basic premise. And they filed cert, of course, in the filed suit in the Northeast, so they could get into the First Circuit, which even though they lost at the district court, the First Circuit actually said, well, we're not going to dismiss this case because we think they might have a point here. And now Smith & Wesson appealed to the Supreme Court, which promptly granted certiorari. So Smith & Wesson probably feels pretty good about their odds in this case. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I can't say this isn't the first time that gun controllers have come after the industry as a whole, taking aims at firearms manufacturers. Likewise, you know, we don't necessarily talk about a whole lot of good things that came out of the Bush administration when it comes to the firearms community, but perhaps this is a standout. What did happen in 2005 as a result of something similar happening was that they created the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Can you go ahead and define what that act is and how do you see it coming into effect with this lawsuit here?
Sure. So that act was a reaction to a number of lawsuits in the 90s and early 2000s that sought to basically hold gun companies accountable for the criminal misuse of their firearms. So they did everything legally, they sold their gun legally, but then a criminal gets a hold of it and misuses it, whether that's the original buyer or someone who the original buyer sold it to or had it stolen from them or whatever else. And so the goal of these lawsuits, oftentimes they didn't even succeed. Usually they didn't even succeed because there's no merit to that argument because the gun company did nothing wrong. But the point of the lawsuit wasn't just to win. It was to bury gun companies in these legal fees, because defending a lawsuit, even if you win, takes years and hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in legal fees, sometimes millions. And so these companies would be burdened by this litigation, and maybe to what the gun control side would want is for them to stop making certain types of guns that they don't like voluntarily. Like maybe if we sue them enough about AR-15s and magazines over 10 rounds, maybe they'll just voluntarily stop making those just to not deal with the litigation anymore. You know, so the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, PLCAA, was a law that I won't go into too much detail because it's not needed right now, but what it basically does is it protects gun companies from legal claims that are based in the intentional misuse of their products. You can still sue gun companies if you buy some gun and it explodes in your hand. Products liability is very much still available. They're still liable for that. And there's also exceptions, which is important to this case, where if they are intentionally breaking a law, that they can still be liable. So PLCAA only protects the gun companies if they have done everything legally, if they sold it legally. Once they break a federal or state or local law, the protections do not apply anymore. So it's only for when they follow all the laws and some criminal nonetheless intentionally misuses their product. That's when the PLCAA defends them. So bringing it back to this case, Mexico is trying to get around the PLCAA by arguing that the very business practices these companies engage in, even though they're ostensibly legal according to Mexico, they know that these cartels are going to want these guns. So, for example, one of the many allegations they make is these gun companies make advertisements that will be appealing to the cartels because they know that the cartels are going to buy up their guns indirectly, so they want to feed that market, and that's just one example of their crazy allegations. It's important to remember that this lawsuit wasn't just brought by Mexico by itself. Jonathan Lowy, who worked for Brady, longtime gun control advocate lawyer, many years in that field, suddenly quit Brady and went to Mexico and brought this lawsuit because he's basically right now siding with a foreign country to try and limit our Second Amendment rights because he couldn't win that argument with the gun control groups. It's disgusting. He should be ashamed of himself. Imagine what we'd think of someone who did that for the First Amendment or any other right. For some reason, the Second Amendment gets treated differently, but it's I think, terrible behavior on his part.
So drawing this back to California, you're seeing as a product of this lawsuit potentially allowing Mexico to sue firearms manufacturers. We saw legislation in California already get passed that was SB 1327 back in 2022, allowing Californians to sue firearms manufacturers for damages, which was a carbon copy of a bill that was created in Texas for abortion clinics. If we see a victory for the Second Amendment community in this case, do you see any potential impact here in California with the laws that we have immediately or potentially down the road in future litigation?
Well, potentially, yes. And of course, SB 1327, we had a partial victory over that case on the fee shifting portion, but I believe the other aspects of it are still very much in effect. So yeah, there could be a chance that depending on how the Supreme Court rules, especially if their ruling conflicts with California law, if California law is at that point interfering with the federal PLCAA, you might have a supremacy clause challenge that comes out of that. But I do want to know it's very premature. The Supreme Court, I do expect they took the case because they want to reverse the First Circuit. And assuming I'm correct, though, even if that's right, we don't know how far or how narrow they're going to go on this. So until we see the actual ruling in this case, it's too early to say how it might affect California law. But sure, there's a possibility that if the Supreme Court does an expansive enough ruling, that California law might be vulnerable in some places to supremacy clause or other challenges. Yeah.
Well, this is definitely one that we're going to want to follow along with, and we are going to continue and do so as the dates for oral argument come up at the Supreme Court. As always, Kostas, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on this and any idea on a potential timeline?
Yeah, well, I don't know the timeline. Obviously, we're going to have a ruling by June because that's when the Supreme Court gets its rulings out by the end of June. Final thoughts, though. I think this is a really important case because the PLCAA has been under increasing attack from the gun control side. They keep trying these ticky-tack lawsuits, suggesting, the advertising was, the reason, and trying to get around it. So it would be nice for the Supreme Court to shore this up because, this doesn't directly impact CRPA members because they're not gun companies. But at the end of the day, any expense borne by these companies gets passed on to you. So if these companies, have to fight these costly lawsuits, even if they win, then it's going to go into the price of guns and ammunition. Or in a worst case scenario, like I was alluding to at the beginning, they might even give up making certain types of products if the legal liability is too much of a pain. That's what the gun control side wants. It's not just they hope to win the lawsuit, sure, but if they just get these companies to have to spend a bunch of money, meanwhile they're being funded by Michael Bloomberg to bring these lawsuits, what do they care? That's still a win for them. It still drains them of resources and maybe pressures them to get rid of these products. So although this isn't directly a Second Amendment case, it is very important to our Second Amendment rights. And also just on principle, the idea that a foreign country, which has had high homicide rates for over a century, is now going to come in and say, oh, you neighboring country that has a much lower crime rate than we do, you're the reason why we have our problems. That's nonsense. Mexico needs to get its situation, for lack of a more appropriate word, together and not blame the United States for its failures, and certainly not blame the rights of Americans for its failures.
Definitely a lot of future implications there. Well, Kostas, I know that you're a busy guy. We got a lot of stuff going on with a lot of other lawsuits. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and give us your take on this today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And guys, if you want to continue to see these videos, if you like these videos, please, it really helps us out. Go ahead and hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons. It really helps with the algorithms. And after all, what our purpose here to do is to educate as many people as possible what's going on in the Second Amendment community so that the Second Amendment can be a priority when we go to the ballot box to choose the legislators who are going to legislate these sorts of things. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.